Hello, my name's Chris Morrow, and by popular demand, I guess, I was asked to do some more ending videos before the end of the year. Weather's been kind of cold, so I went back to the files and looked for things that I haven't used. And one of them was another bug shot, the first bug shot I ever attended, which was in Texas, and there was a talk by Alex Wild, so that should be exciting. Enjoy!
That's remotely related to photography and bugs, and you want to hear us talk about it, the suggestion box in the back of the room. Alright, so I like ants. I didn't for the longest time really know why I liked ants. I've always liked ants when I was little. I once met when I was 8, I met a second cousin of mine, and she's a nice woman in her 20s, and she was trying to make small talk with a little kid. And she's like, "So Alex, what do you like to do?" And I think she was expecting an answer like, I like Spider-Man or hockey or something. What I said was, I like colony insects. Which was true because I like ants and I like bees. And that was the common thing, is that they lived in colonies. Anyway, ants are just about everywhere. They are pretty diverse, but not hugely diverse. There's not actually, more species of ants than there are, say, katydids, but you're much more likely to encounter them. This is just a small sampling of some of the shapes and sizes and colors and forms of ants found around the world. And they're kind of diverse enough where you might look at this and go, what makes all these things ants? It's not that they, don't have wings. There are lots of other things that don't have wings, like, silverfish and dragonflies who pull the wings off or something. This is a picture I like to show that shows a very small Huntress Ant colony. This is photographed in Africa, and it encapsulates a number of features of ant biology. First, you can see that there are a mixture of individuals here that don't have wings and one that has wings. There's actually 3 different castes of ants in this picture. There are 2 female castes. You have a queen here. She's the mother. And then you have her daughter workers. And then you have this waspy looking thing. That's an ant too. That's actually a male. And ants are basically a kind of wasp. And when you see male ants, you can kind of confirm it for yourself. They really do look kind of waspy. So what differentiates ants from other types of wasps and perhaps other wingless wasps? Well, there's a couple of characters to look for. And the first one is ants, they have a narrow waist, but not only that, it's that they have not one constriction, but 2 really tight constrictions here in the waist, so that there's at least one separate bead-like segment that stands out. I mean, a lot of the narrow-waisted insects, the Hymenoptera, have narrow waists, but it's this bead-like segment. And in most cases, but not all, this is an exception here, the antennae have this long first segment, and then this second bit with lots and lots of little floppy segments there. So you kind of look for that combination. All ants are social. So you will never find an ant that just lives off by itself, just doing its own solitary thing. There are a few species that are parasitic enough where they've lost their workers, but they always live inside the nests of other ants, taking advantage of the social riches. Anyway, so this technical morphological definition of an ant would help you recognize that this strange thing called the sausage fly is actually also an ant. It's got that antennae, long first segment, and it's got this doubly constricted waist. This is actually a male army ant, and they are so weird that many of these are actually described in a different family before people recognize how you recognize an ant. We have a local species here, maybe 4 or 5 local species. They're not quite as big as this, that do come to lights at night. And so one thing you might see at the black light here is this sausage fly looking thing. It's actually a male army ant. More typically, you see an ant colony like this that has a larger queen that is much is recognizably different from all her workers. You can see there's an awful lot of ants in this picture. And some ants can just get downright kind of weird. There are 2 ants in this picture. This one here, and then this thing here. This is a photo I took at Buckshot Belize a few years ago. And if you ask an ant biologist why they're interested in ants, you're going to get a long explanation about how important they are to ecology and how much they outweigh everything else in the forest and how much biomass passes through the ants and how much soil they churn and how they're running everything. But really, those are all just excuses in our sort of corporate report culture where we try to rack up numbers. We really like ants because they're cool. And if you pull that weird thing out of the entrance here, it turns out it actually is an ant. It's a special caste of ant in these nested turtle ants that functions as a living door. So their purpose, these particular ants, these turtle ants, live in twigs and branches that have been hollowed out by wood-boring beetle larvae, leaving this cavity behind. And these ants move in to fill the space, and it's really competitive. There are many different kinds of ants, like acrobat ants and twig ants and other things that are trying to get a hold of these cavities to nest in. And these guys sort of get in and squat using these heads. Incidentally, we don't have turtle ants right here. This is mostly a tropical group, but if you drive an hour south, there is a species, Cephalotes texanus, that does have these living door heads. That's found starting around San Antonio going south, so we actually do have turtle ants here in Texas. And they're pretty cool. Oh, they also glide, so that's pretty cool too. If you knock a turtle ant off a tree branch, it won't fall straight down. At least in the rainforest species, they'll glide back to the tree trunk. This was one of those wonderful accidental discoveries by a researcher who's working on mosquitoes in the rainforest Canada. He kept getting attacked by ants, brushing them off, and noticing that they wouldn't fall all the way to the ground. He'd knock them off and they'd come right back up again after going back to the tree trunk. Anyway, a lot of just amazing biology in ants. Still, this leaves the academic question of why are there so many ants? So, if we think back to basic ecology, like elementary school level ecology 101, we think of like the trophic pyramid where energy comes in sort of at the bottom, you know, from the plants eating sunlight and all that, then kind of gets channeled progressively upwards. We have lots of plants, fewer herbivores, fewer carnivores, and then fewer carnivores that eat the carnivores, and that kind of thing. More complicated than that, but if we adopt that framework briefly, we can see ants that are up there as predators. So there are ants that are able to channel some biomass from other animals. This is a Huntress ant. This is also a species, incidentally, we get in South Texas. I first encountered this in the Amazon, but this Amazonian species actually gets up here in Texas, kind of say. That's sort of a predator of caterpillars. But ants don't just channel animal biomass into their own colonies. They are also extremely important scavengers. The fate of most insects that die in the eastern deciduous forest is to be carried away by an ant. One of my favorite studies of all time, a very simple scientific study done in Maryland about 30 years ago. Researchers just had a bunch of dead insects and dropped them at random in the forest and just followed what happened. They dropped hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dead insects. And every single one they dropped, every single one was taken away by an ant. And not only that, it only took on average 3 minutes for a dead insect to be taken by an ant. The longest it took was maybe 39 minutes or something like that. So the ants are out there also channeling all this dead biomass into their colonies. So that makes more ants. Here's ants demonstrating their superiority over an orthopteran. But even if you kind of crunch those numbers and try to figure out, maybe that's why there's so many ants, there still aren't there still are more ants even than their scavenging and predation would suggest. And it turns out that if you grind up ants and look at the stable isotopes of carbon, this is a handy trick that you can kind of estimate where on that trophic chain something falls. Ants are by and large register as herbivores, in spite of all the carnivory and scavenging. And that's kind of weird, but it has to do with the ubiquitous honeydew feeding habits of most species of ants. And so that comes back to, so here's an ant, and you often find ants, and you'll see some around here, living in close association with these sap-feeding insects. And sap-feeding insects are also very common, but they face a problem that their food has a lot of carbohydrates, but not very many of the amino acids and proteins that they need to build their own bodies. So these sap-feeding insects, this is maybe a whitefly and aphids, they have to eat far more sap, just huge volumes of it, to filter out the proteins, and they're left with all these excess sugars, which they excrete as honeydew. I know many of you have been photographing the sharpshooters as they pee out all this excess sugar. So ants have basically figured out how to eat plant resources through these other insects. So again, that makes more ants. These relationships with these sap-feeding insects is not something that just happens above ground. One thing that you might not be aware of is that there's whole empires of ants under our feet, and tree roots are often covered with these are a type of scale insect called the ground pearl, but there's all sorts of root-feeding aphids and other insects which are underground feeding on tree roots, and there are all sorts of ants that they're taking advantage of that too. Here's an interesting photo from in front of my house in Illinois, where I lived until recently. I had this red brick cobblestone sidewalk. The grass was growing out between, so I just pulled the bricks apart. You get this nice little cross-section, and there were often these sap-feeding insects clinging to the roots, and these little ant colonies kind of springing up around them. These are thief ants. There are other ways that ants can feed directly from plants too. A lot of plants have figured out that ants are really good at picking out butterfly and moth eggs. Because ants like to prey on things. Most ants aren't great predators. They like their prey to be kind of sedentary. Some plants that attract ants also get this sort of cleaning service. So especially in the neotropics, you get a lot of plants with these little extrafloral nectaries, these puffs that you will often find ants on. Incidentally, I just want to point out this genus of ant. This is called Chromatic Acid, and they have a very distinct heart-shaped abdomen that attaches, that's kind of hung beneath the little bead-like segment ahead. And this is a really unusual form of the abdomen in ants. And this group of ants is found almost everywhere in the world. Africa, Australia, North America, South America is one of the most common ants here at McKinney Roughs. And because it's easy to recognize and really common everywhere, you're going to teach yourself a genus of ant to recognize. I recommend this one just because they're everywhere. Anyway, so there are tons of ants because they're basically cheating by feeding from all levels of the trophic pyramid simultaneously. And most species live in the soil. And when you have such a huge biomass tunneling through the soil, excavating chambers, the end result is this big churning effect. So if you walk around the forest here and find little piles of soil built up above the leaf litter, there's a number of things that can do that. There's some tunneling spiders, there's some wasps, but most of the time it's going to be ants. And I know we all learn about earthworms being really important in soil cycling, and they certainly are in many parts of the world, particularly the north temperate zone. But in the warmer climates, ants are really what's moving most of the soil around. And so ants have this tremendous importance importance in mixing the soil. And these activities can sometimes be pretty remarkable. This is a nest of leafcutter ant in northern Argentina. We actually have a similar species here that makes mounds that aren't quite as big, but that are still pretty impressive. So here's a close-up view of leafcutter ants. After this talk, by the way, we'll be able to photograph the ants back there. But anyway, you can see these nests in space. Kind of get a sense of how they dot the landscape. And it turns out that little patches of forest often regenerate on the old deceased colonies. So we're talking about landscape engineers, really important animals. Because ants are everywhere and are super numerous and are doing everything, a lot of other species have sort of been captured into the evolutionary orbit of ants. A lot of plants, for instance, have sort of designed their lives around ants. Some species of plants rely on ants to disperse their seeds. This is a swollen thorn acacia, which is found in Central America. It's really common at our bugshot site in Belize, where this was photographed. And you find these understory plants that have these big thorns that if you go and try to prick yourself with a thorn, it's not that sharp and it's kind of squishy. And you think, that's a terrible thorn. I mean, like, herbivores should just crunch it. But then the ants pour out and start trying to kill you. And it really hurts. And it's a very painful sting. And so the plants have started, they provide ants with a place to live. They make little food bodies on the tips of the leaves for the ants to eat. And in return, the ants chase away bumbling myrmecologists and also snip away vines that grow close to the plant. This is one example. Many ant plants. This is an Azteca that lives inside a cecropia tree. This is another common neotropical one. A lot of things try to look like ants. I know Peter mentioned one of the katydids last night as being an excellent ant mimic. Lots of things try to look like ants, probably for a variety of reasons. This is a mirrored plant bug that does, and ant mimics often do this thing where they can't quite get that narrow waist down, but they then paint little bits of white, have little white coloration to sort of mimic that. There's a very closely related species, by the way, that's red and black that I've seen running around in the bushes out here. Here's a spider. This is from our Belize site as well. Brandon Wu, one of our young participants, and he was 14 or 15 at the time, comes up to me and says, I think this is a spider. And I launched into this long lecture about how it was a great pseudo-myrmex ant until it jumped off his arm and left a silk trail. So, never mind, I'll just shut up now. And this is the genus Cinemosina, which we do get around here. They're also an excellent mimic here, although I think they mimic acrobat ants and maybe Formica around here. It's not just bugs and spiders. Our most common local mimicry complex involves this red-black coloration. So here is one of our locally common acrobat ants, Chromatic Acid, and here is a Longhorn Beetle that mimics, maybe not this ant in particular, but as part of this complex. Because our common local carpenter ant, Campodotaceae, is also that color, as are some of our local jumping spiders. There's several local species of jumping spiders that have this distinct red-black coloration. Also sort of move like ants, so often found in association with ants. Again, it's not totally clear what benefit the mimics get out of this. There was an interesting study done a few years ago that suggested in a similar system that these spiders, at least, were avoiding wasps that were general saltisted, general jumping spider predators. And so just by looking like something else, they were not getting the search image. But again, this system is scarcely worked on.
That little bug, you were simulating the little skinny abdomen.
Yeah.
Like color or whatever, that's a visual clue that it's another bug or spider?
Well, it's not clear. I mean, the obvious thought is birds. Birds are such visual predators. But a lot of birds will eat ants anyway. So it might make more sense that it is like a visually searching predator. There are a couple neotropical or tropical species that eat ants that might be trying to fool some of the more visual ants, like the green tree ants are pretty visual, and they have a spider predator that mimics a wounded tree ant, has eye spots, waves its legs around, and when the ants go out to investigate, they get eaten. It's pretty cruel. But it's not always clear what they're trying to fool.
But yeah, it's amazing. One they black red,
Yeah.
but yeah, even that.
Even that, yeah. Well, the funny thing about mimicry complexes is that they kind of shift from place to place. So here, we're really big on the red, red, black. But other places, it's other color patterns. The velvet ants are probably one of the best examples of this, where our local species are mostly black, black, red, but there's several species that convergently have that coloration. You go east, and it's more of a red, red, speckled black thing. You go west, and it's more of an even orange. Like they have these, as you shift in space, you get to these different complexes. Really great topic, but anyway, we'll continue on because there are more ants. There's always more ants. Because ants are so numerous, and because they capture so much of the biomass that's out there, for animals that are able to kind of crack the ant code, they have kind of a secret back way to getting these amazing riches that ant colonies amass. So ant colonies, particularly large ant colonies, often have associates that are in there doing things like stealing the food or eating the ant larvae or tricking the ants into regurgitating food back. This is another bugshot Bailey's photo. This is Ventis army ant beetle. These are the army ants. This is one from the North Temperate Zone, Northern California, a little predatory rose beetle. This is a little ant, I guess it's the genus Adranes. This thing lives in the brood piles eating ant brood. Didn't notice it at first, it's a little tiny, slow-moving beetle. But when you open up an ant colony, if you can distract yourself from the idea you're getting bitten and stung to death, it's worth paying attention to what's living in the garbage piles and in the brood piles. It's some really fantastic associates. Ants, of course, have their own predators and parasites. This is one of my own weak attempts at high-speed photography, and this is an ant decapitating fly. It's a different genus than the one John showed you attacking the fire ants. This is an apocephalus that attacks a carpenter ant. It's called an ant decapitating fly, not because this ant is about to fly in and slice the head off, although it turns out there was a species that was recently discovered to do something similar. I digress. This fly will lay an egg in the body of the ant. The egg will hatch out into a little maggot that will eat the ant's insides, and when it's ready, it climbs up into the head capsule, kills the ant, the head falls off, and the fly has this wonderful protective capsule to develop in. So the parasites are usually somewhat similar in size to the head of the ant. How did I get this photo? This is a carpenter ant from Illinois. I broke into the nest, and the flies just materialized. Sometimes they're just out, maybe lurking near the nest entrances, but the odor of an ant colony as the ants are running around attracts a lot of these things. So you just want to be paying attention to what looks like specks of dust sort of flying around. These are really common. We have a number of species of phorids in this area that attack all sorts of things. I didn't use a laser system. What I did was I just focused on an ant because the flies are going to be attracted to the ant. So I just set up to do my regular standard ant photography, and I would hit flies as a matter of course. Again, flash set at really low power. I think I cranked the ISO to 800 or 1600 or something to get that flash power down. But anyway, yeah. Oh, and I like this photo because it sort of illustrates the many trophic levels at which ants are involved. This is a photo from Ecuador. And let's see, step back, what is this? This green bit in the back is a massive caterpillar that was just crawling along the trail, sort of. It was suffering because all of these braconids.
Hey everyone, it's me, Chris Murrow. So, this was during my first bug shot where I was learning how to use my camera. And it's at this point that I learned that point-and-shoot cameras actually overheat around the 20-minute mark, and they automatically shut off. So, what Alex Wild was trying to say here is basically you can have a caterpillar that specializes on a specific type of plant, but you can also have parasitic flies, or wasps in this case, I think, that will lay their eggs specifically on that one species of caterpillar. And when they hatch, you can have predatory insects such as the ants here, and but they are also have parasites of their own, which is what you see here in focus in the middle here, which is I believe it's a type of forward fly. And you have all these layers of complexity, just kind of one thing on top of the other. And so even though this is really not a good shot of a caterpillar or some maggots or some ants, it's a great shot of, a fly. And even though that fly isn't really I mean, it's sort of centered, but it could be more centered. But even though it's not there, like, this whole picture is just sort of telling the story. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.